Hi everyone, Lily here, the data analyst at the Hulings Fund for Visual Artists, and I'm here today to talk with 2019 Accelerator Fellow Andie Freeman. And she's here to talk a little bit about how she's adapted throughout the pandemic and kind of made changes to her art business. So, welcome, Andie.
Hey, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. So, one of the questions I wanted to talk about with you today is, how you've been adapting your art business, obviously, but how have you stayed agile and adaptable, particularly related to your sales strategy? Because one of the trends we're noticing is that a lot of artists are really having to change the way that they approach their sales and marketing, obviously, a lot more online. And so, if you could speak to that a little bit, that would be really interesting for us to talk about.
So I had an in-person studio, which was open to the public for 3 years. And when the pandemic happened, because of a couple other things, that went away. So that was pretty disappointing in some ways, but also I wouldn't have been able to see anybody anyway. So I had to kind of quickly think, how am I going to take that feeling and try and promote it as best as I can from the situation I've got. At the same time, I have a part-time job that ramped up pretty quickly because we do advocacy for artists. So I had a little bit of a probably 2 or 3 months where I didn't get as much accomplished as I wish, which I think is pretty common for everybody right now.
Sure.
Um, so some of the things I did was, because of my other job, I had already started learning how to edit video. So that's probably the biggest change I've done is I'm adding more video, which usually means I'm setting up a tripod and a camera and taking it by myself, several takes, and then taking it and editing it down until I get what I want. But I feel like that's gotten a good response, and it's a big direction that a lot of people are going. And then also my project changed kind of dramatically. It had been a planned exhibition for March 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I spoke with the museum and said, this is going to be difficult for me to achieve. And also, you're not probably sure that you can have people there in 2021. And there were too many variables.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there were other things planned, like me coming down there to do artist talks and stuff all this year. So what we've done instead is we've changed it to an artist in residence program. It will be a 2-year program now, so it'll go through 2022. And in that, there'll be 2 exhibitions, one small happening next May, one large happening in November 2022, and a whole lot of community engagement programs, which will happen throughout the 2 years. So in that case, I'm using the internet to engage with that group
Mm-hmm.
monthly, whether it's through a coloring sheet that's educational, or a Facebook Live talk, or maybe a video about one of the pieces that I'm creating. So any number of those things will be shown virtually for the next 2 years. A couple of them will be in person, but even when they're in person, I plan on promoting it virtually because, first of all, it casts a much wider net. And the project is interesting to people who are not necessarily on Hilton Head. So I think it's going to be a much better project at the end of the day. It'll be a lot more work, but I think that the work will be worth it. So, and it's a better service to the museum as well. So that makes me, feel good about that too.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like what you're saying is that it may actually have yield better results for you. The fact that you had to virtualize in this way for this virtual exhibition and all of the different ways that you're doing the videos and things like that. And I'm also curious, how has your peer network been impacted by this? Have you felt more engaged? What are the different ways that you're engaging with other artists and, collectors or anything like that?
Yeah, well, so my peer group, I've got several different peer groups. So I've got the Clark Hulings peer group that I still stay in touch with, which has been fantastic. And we meet once a month on the phone. And so, I don't know that that has been as impacted, that communication, because of the pandemic, but I think that our conversation has definitely been impacted. We've all really, really, brainstormed for each other about how to move forward. And a lot of us are thinking, it seems to me, various different ways to put your sales message out there that are targeted to who you want, but also not being more agile and just going ahead and doing it and not necessarily overthinking everything, I think has probably been kind of a lot of what we've talked about. As far as I've got a group here in Raleigh. I haven't stayed as much in touch with them because my studio has not been available to me. So, but we still stay in touch. We were doing Zoom calls for a while, and that was really good. So I think having many different kinds of groups to keep in touch with is really helpful, because you get such a wide variety on the way people think about a problem and how they come to a solution. And I found that, you can listen to a lot of voices and get mired down in that. But when you start to kind of understand that just listening and then taking that information and drilling down what's really valuable for you and thinking about how you work, how your process speaks to your particular audience, and making that message really clear is that's sometimes challenging, but I think it's really important, because you just never know. Like, I listen to a lot of different things too, business wise, and you never know when that one spark is going to hit you, and then that's it. That's the one that works,
Yeah.
So yeah, like having the time to speak to those people, and then having time to sit down in quiet, which I really value a lot. I'll sit outside and work sometimes and just turn it all off and just brainstorm. It's so important, because you really do, those good ideas come to the top, and the ones that won't fit you, they may not be bad, but they may not fit you, will go away.
Yeah. And I want to pick up on what you said there, just taking some time to maybe sit outside or for yourself and just kind of put everything to the side and have time to think, because a lot of other artists I've been talking with have been saying similar things. This is a time when maybe for some people inspiration seems to be at an ultimate high, but for others like an all-time low. And so almost everyone I've spoken with has said something along those lines, like you have to really take time for yourself to let those good ideas come up. And you also mentioned, you made me think of something that another fellow had said, Steven, he mentioned that it's important to really kind of tap into all those different pillars of, I guess, income or revenue streams that you have as a visual artist. And, like you said, you never know which one's going to stick. You also never know which one's going to crumble. So kind of trying to diversify in that way is something that we've seen in the trends.
Yeah, I think there's so many voices, and everybody's kind of been scrambling the past 6 months to get their message out, as far as, use me, use this idea, come to this, seminar, and really, like, finding those people that you trust. Like, Clark Hulings Fund is definitely an organization that I trust what they say, and trying to kind of zero in on those sources is super important. I mean, it's a balance, being open-minded and also not getting overwhelmed. It is really easy to get overwhelmed right now with trying to predict the future. I think that's a lot of it. Like, all of us are kind of like, okay, so now what are we going to see in December? What are we going to see in the spring? And I think a lot of people from some of my experiences would say that even their person that they were in March may not have recognized what we are dealing with now in October, and how, there were definitely times my team my part-time job, we talked about how in March we closed down our office for 2 weeks and said, well, we'll be back in 2 weeks, so we'll come and get our stuff, no big deal. Wow. How ridiculous that was. And now we're permanently working at home. So, it's just, everybody's got to really be flexible. And I tell my kids this too. I have a kid that's in college right now, and I think the name of the game in general, but especially this year, is be flexible and be open and listen to what people say, but don't flip out about every new thing you hear, which is going to be tough for people, especially if they're just getting started. Because I know when I was just getting started, I didn't have this situation going on, and I still had a hard time not wanting to follow every lead idea that I saw.
Mm.
And that's where the quiet, I definitely think, comes in, is really like use your own common sense. If it sounds like it's too good to be true, it probably is. If it sounds like it's, not going to work for you personally because of a scheduling thing, think about that. But don't, but
Hmm.
yeah, it's kind of balance.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the idea, the one kind of takeaway you have for this year is be flexible because I was going to ask you, what advice do you have for other artists who are trying to pivot their strategy during this time? And so I'm wondering if you have anything else to add to that.
Having sales channels that you feel like really fit your market, if you can figure that out, that is valuable. And I look at what a lot of other artists do. So if I have somebody who is in my group or somebody who I value, I've seen their stuff and I think, wow, they're really doing a good job, I'll look at it, I'll reverse engineer. Sometimes I'll look at it and think, well, they might look like they're doing really well, but that may not 100% show the picture. So, you kind of have to weigh some of that. But I have some friends from here in Raleigh that are doing okay, and part of that's because they had gotten started in some sales channels that just happened to be working for them after post pandemic. They were not people who were 100% selling in the studio, and my friends who were 100% selling in the studio are definitely having issues. If they didn't have their website kind of up and going, they had to really move quickly.
You
And
have to
I
virtualize
think
in
that,
a speedy way.
yeah, you do. Yeah, you can't have, and I just reverse engineering people who you think, wow, that speaks to me, not taking their style or copying their work, but copying their business,
The
or
business.
even not copying, but yeah, well, or I'll look at several different people and kind of take like a little mixed bag of what I think really works for me, and that it's good to be open to those things. And if something's not working, cut it out. I mean, give it time and cut it out, because there's not enough time in the day to do it all.
Yeah.
I'm constantly having to remind myself because
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot right now. So yeah, trying to figure out like what's really working for me and what should I leave behind is important too.
Yeah, that's a really interesting piece about the reverse engineering, and I think that um, falls along the same lines as taking inspiration, but not necessarily for your actual art that you make, but for the business side. And we know from the research that a lot of artists are not spending so much time on the business side of their art business. And so, part of what our work at Clark Hulings Fund in our fellowship and in all the work that we do in the Art Business Accelerator program and beyond is really to help artists realize that art is a business and artists should run it. And so I think what you said kind of is a good place for us to leave on, to end on for this chat.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, it was fantastic talking to you.
You too. Very interesting. And I, look forward to hearing more about your work in the future. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.